The number of energy crises that we have ended up discussing and having those chats, I've lost count.
My attitude on the power has been actually, well, you could just leave this floating to the day ahead. Just leave all of it.
Change, I always say, happens when something big makes it happen.
Better than seasonal. Got loads of solar, loads of wind. You know, the nukes are kind of doing okay.
You know, Germany's probably the worst hit in the price spikes over recent months.
I sometimes feel like I'm at odds around the kind of renewables kind of discussion.
And I really don't believe it's a time to panic right now.
Be prepared, don't panic, and don't use it.
It's really easy to forget about sustainability. It's really easy to park it and just get back to fundamentals. Take data centers. You know, I'll always love talking about.
Oh, here we go.
Yes.
You're not writing anything for those at the moment.
Maybe I am. I'm like that when you see chat shows and you know the person invited on has a book to sell or has a show coming out, and they're like they do chit chat and then they want to get it out there.
Looks the camera.
Yeah. So there it is. Yeah. So yeah. Hello, I'm Elliott Bermudez-Galton, head of Europe here at True Group.
And I'm Adam Baker, sales director at True Group.
We're having a conversation. We've worked together for many years, have we not?
More than I care to remember.
Yes, absolutely. And we're having a conversation about current affairs and in the energy market. What's going on? What are our frustrations? What we're seeing? Which we've had many of these talks over the years, haven't we, Adam? So the number of energy crises that we have ended up discussing and having those chats, I've lost count. And here we are yet again having another one.
So why not put it on a podcast and see how it comes out?
Why not? Exactly that. Yeah. I mean, I'm finding it deja vu. I'm frustrated a little bit.
Okay, tell me why.
Yeah, I'm frustrated that we haven't necessarily learnt the lessons from what happened in the past again. And I talk about this a lot, that we had fundamentals running the energy markets for years, and is the wind blowing? Is the sun shining? And then we had this phenomena change everything. Geopolitics came in, mainly when Trump was first elected, right? This unknown quantity that could change markets overnight. But we came out of COVID when the real energy crisis happened. Even before that, we had Fukushima blew up. I talk about it all the time. We had financial crisis. We had beasts in the east, mini beasts for the east. They were nothing in comparison to what we had where post-COVID, when we had the real energy crisis, when Trump had already caused chaos, Putin came in, invaded Ukraine, and markets went truly, truly out of control. And Europe change, I always say, happens when something big makes it happen. So we had Europe go, we need to wean ourselves off of Russian gas and oil, and things actually got done.
Agree, yeah.
And then things have calmed down since that crisis, and it's almost as if we've taken it for granted and we've slowed the pace of change down. And here we are yet again with a crisis, and we're exposed. So it's frustrating, I find.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be this way, right? There must be there has to be kind of a different slant on this, a different kind of way to approach it. I think what's been kind of interesting in this crisis, I think in a couple of ways, is that there has been a fundamental disconnect between power and gas. So actually, power in the short term markets over the last few months has been pretty stable, actually, to some extent. And I think if there is fortune to be had in the circumstances, it is that it's happening in the summer and not in the winter. Because I think if this was happening in the depths of winter, I think we'd have a really big problem. But the renewables on the grid is really helping to suppress power price. And on top of that, obviously the collapse of the carbon market in the UK, I think is holding price kind of at a level which it's not great, but it's acceptable if you've planned ahead. And I think if you've mitigated the risk and learned the lessons that you were talking about before, then actually I think you're in a reasonable place, I think, in terms of mitigating this kind of short-term, what we hope will be a short-term kind of blip.
Does it feel like that? You and I have been through a lot of ups and downs in the market. For me, it doesn't feel that post-COVID energy crisis panic mode. I think for me, I worry that the longer the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the higher the upside risk. But it doesn't feel yet in the realms of that level of crisis.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of parts to that, right? So for me, you've got a lot of people now are prepared for a crisis. So I think one of the things that really struck me during the energy crisis in 2021, 22 was how inexperienced the energy buyers were at that stage. And one of the reasons for that is that people have become so sort of blasé with the cost of energy that actually, and we used to, I used to talk about volatility between 40 and 60 pounds a megawatt hour. I mean, if anyone saw 60 pounds a megawatt hour at the moment, they'd tear your arm off.
Yep.
So I think they're kind of, people became just kind of really sort of lackadaisical about kind of actually what energy looked like and what the risks were. And of course, then, the market reacted as it did. Putin invaded. We ran out, fundamentally, we're running out of gas. And the market went bananas. And suddenly energy became an issue for CFOs, for managing directors, the highest echelon of business, because the numbers went from banal to, fundamentally going to take my business under.
There's businesses not here now that didn't have good strategies in place.
Absolutely. And even if you had a great strategy in place, the impact was, material in nearly every case. Look, there's always the stories out there that the people that signed in, the August and the April beforehand signed a nice 3-year contract and came out sort of smelling of roses, so to speak. But the bill shock that they're having now is enormous. Yep. You've got people coming off, sort of 14, 15, 16p coming into contracts that are 22p. Now, while 22p is good in the current market, that's still a bill shock that you've got to manage kind of as an end user. What I think we're now seeing, though, is businesses went through that process. So energy buyers, even if they were junior at the time, have now been exposed to that. So we've got a whole raft of kind of energy experts.
We've all got PTSD, are we not?
Well, I think there's definitely a little bit of PTSD for some of us. I know when the first kind of missiles were launched in Iran, there was definitely a sense of, not again. But I do think, therefore, that that experience is allowing people to not hit the panic button. But you've always got that unfortunate group that have got a contract to do now. And this is why we would always advocate about planning, be prepared. Don't wait until the last minute to do that contract. Try and have a strategy that puts you slightly ahead of your renewal. So if it's a fixed contract, you don't have to sign multiple year contracts. If you look at a price and it looks competitive and compelling, just sign a 1-year contract. Just take it. Just push yourself a bit further out. Mm-hmm. But you could do that anytime up to, after you've signed the existing contract, you can just go again. So this conception that you have to wait is just, it still drives me mad that it still exists, that people think that way.
I agree with you. And I think you and I, Bakes, we've said this for years, that you're getting ahead of this. I always think it's about control, right? If you leave it late, you do things last minute, you're a price taker, right? You're a victim of the market conditions. When Trump or Putin sneezes, you catch a cold. And, if you're running your business, that's not necessarily the way you do things in any other realm of it. What you do is you plan, you come up with a strategy that suits you, and then you tailor it to the market. And you then, I stand by this, it's proven time and time again, when you look at the market, you look at businesses, the companies that get their plan that suits them and give themselves control, because that's what it's about, it's that control, are protected.
Yeah.
And they can understand and forecast what's coming. And the thing is, the market changes, the government legislation changes, the business itself internally will change, their customers change. So why you would make a decision necessarily, panicking, like a panic decision, and jump in, or make no decision, I much prefer that plan, make it suited to what you're doing, because then you can navigate any change and you leave yourself that breathing space.
Control is, control is kind of, my favourite word when talking about energy, particularly flexible contracts, right? The kind of, I really try and avoid language about kind of saving money and it being kind of some sort of panacea for low energy costs, right? You're on a market, if you have some exposure to it, that market will either be friendly or unfriendly, depending on what your level of exposure is. But what you do with that flexible contract wrestle that control back on your side of the house. And if you have some exposure, that should be a choice, and it's a calculated decision about how much exposure you have. So whether you're on a kind of largely, conservative strategy, if you will, so you might take 50 or 60% of your volume the whole time, right? So actually you buy that across the curve. It's winter and summer, agnostic. Actually, your exposure to that market is by default halved. So, a £50 movement is actually only £25 impact for you. I know the maths of that. Any traders out there will turn their heads at that comment, but the principle kind of for people to understand is sound, I think. And I think that ability to choose and control, I think, is absolutely paramount for businesses to kind of bring that back in. And then, of course, the other option is actually where's the cheapest place for your energy? The cheapest place is at the point of delivery. And as we're seeing with power, and I've had this discussion with a number of prospects and customers in this period who have got April renewals. My attitude on the power has been actually, well, you could just leave this floating to the day ahead. Just leave all of it. Actually, it would be risky. It's not without its kind of downside, but I think the market's outturned pretty well day ahead, simply because the weather we're having slightly better than seasonal. Got loads of solar, loads of wind. The nukes are kind of doing okay. So actually, our impact of the gas is moderated, I suppose, really. And so I think there's some opportunities there.
I don't disagree with you. And I think, I always turn to what's going on across Europe and look at, I'm a strong believer that businesses take a group approach, if that's their structure, and they look at what works on a strategy level. And then they have, an eye to regional differences, what's going on the ground, the reality of the situation. Things are different if you look at Italy and Germany. They are gas-exposed countries. Germany's probably the worst hit in the price spikes over recent months. Italy's not far behind. And then you compare it. When I talk about planning and control, it's not just business level, it's European level, it's country level. And you look at France, which has that nuclear base load, and it has imports of renewables, and you have Spain, which is hit a rocket to the moon and getting its solar on, and you look at the differences there. We're looking at peaks when things aren't going great. Peaks in Germany and Italy, 150 megawatt hour euros. And then you've got the countries that have changed and shifted the makeup of their grid, of their generation, 50 euros. So it's material difference.
Northern Germany, southern Spain, slightly different opportunities for solar, though, I would say. It's similar to the solar in Bolton not working quite as well as other parts.
No, we don't get a lot of it, right?
Absolutely. But I think it's really interesting. I'm interested in what you think around the kind of the renewables being a kind of low cost solution. I nearly said panacea again, but I've used that one.
Yeah,
I do like that phrase though.
It's a good word.
Great word.
It is.
But I think I sometimes feel like I'm at odds around the kind of renewables kind of discussion, because I don't necessarily see, with the way the kind of contracts for difference work, the kind of strike prices, I don't see the likelihood that it will drive price down. I actually see it as actually price inflationary in some aspects. So I'm interested in why your view on that, I suppose, and how that impacts kind of the comments about Spain and kind of the move to renewables in Europe.
For me, it goes back to the conversation I was saying earlier about, in your contract you buy yourself control and almost a buffer of protection from being a price taker. When things go wild, they're outside of control, you have to react. If you're completely exposed to what are prices underpinned by gas, then you are going to feel that shock, right? So from a company level, having that on-site, I'm moving towards loving seeing the change. It's a revolution at the moment, a change in thinking, which is, instead of being completely reliant on your grid connection, you can consider on-site generation, battery storage. That gives you flexibility there. There's a recent shift in certain markets, like the data center market, to bring back gas, but green gas and biomethane, and all of these things, not necessarily coming from a sustainability element. They're coming from a power reality issue, constraints in the grid and everything.
That blows my mind, by the way, powering a data center with gas.
It's mad,
Sometimes
isn't
I
it?
have to really kind of stop and really work that out.
Yeah, it was the dash to gas, and it's real, and it's happening because it's not a dash to gas, it's a dash to power.
Yeah.
And they can't get power. You know, you look at Ivor in Slough, or you look at Frankfurt in Germany, and there's no power. And there's not going to be power for years. And when the power does come, there's already a big queue for it. So that's driven innovation. I talked earlier about big events or big issues causing change and making action happen, and that's happening. So everyone is now, and I advocate this, is look neutrally, emotionally free when you look at technology.
Yeah.
Nuclear, you have strong opinions on nuclear. I say don't assess it as a technology. There's no one silver bullet, but all these technologies, have your mind open to all of them and create a structure. And then the thing Europe is looking at is, and it's interesting because I was on with a great guy from the European Commission on a webinar on Earth Day, on the 22nd of April, Francesco Bertoldi, lovely guy. And on the very same day that I did that webinar with him, the EU announced Accelerate EU, which is almost there. We knew this was a problem. We acted, but we didn't act quickly enough. And now they've launched it, and we're going at hell for leather to get rid of those last residual reliance on the Russian gas and oil.
Yeah.
Okay. To bring back control, to generate a few things that really excite me, because I talked about frustration at the beginning. But what really excites me now is that Europe is looking for control, and Europe is looking for a nice blend of technologies that take us away from that. Because what we're worried about is we moved away from what was Russian dependency on gas, and we've replaced it to some extent with dependency on American LNG.
Yeah.
Right. Which,
very true.
Which, that's another out of our control. We've got issues over there. If we do that, one single source of failure and volatility. So what this new launch by Europe is to say, first of all, they're going to invest in renewables. They're going to invest in technology that can help us be less reliant on it. Good stat for you. Last year, Europe renewable generation hit 30%. And it's the first time in history that's overtaken gas generation.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So
Missed that stat. That's a good stat.
It's a good stat, and it's exciting. But on one side, I go, only 30%. And it's interesting because Europe spends, just checking my numbers here because I can't remember off the top of my head, but the 340 billion Europe spends on fossil fuel imports. 340 billion euros. And this year, the crisis, I want to make it real, right?
Okay.
The crisis in the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz has cost Europe an extra 24 billion to date. So we've paid that, we had to get the checkbook and pay extra because we still, across Europe, power our countries. 57% of our power generation is imports of fossil fuel. Still. Now, it's progress. It's less than it used to be. But I think this is what I was talking about, that frustration. We need action. We need to decouple ourselves from those imports as quickly as possible. So Spain's made good progress. We've got nuclear in France, puts them in a unique position. But England, United Kingdom and Germany, we're really exposed. We don't have in the UK Rough. Remember it broke? It was the long-term storage off the coast of, I want to say, Norfolk, I think it was. Somewhere over there.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Rough. Maybe I should know where it was, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure it's off the coast.
But yeah, I mean, without that storage, obviously that forced us into a kind of different route of travel, right? So our LNG kind of issues, kind of using floating storage, but then the exposure to the spot market, you obviously get that volatility, don't you? That kind of comes through. It's, I mean, the politics of that. I mean, I heard a number the other day that it was going to cost £1 trillion to make Rough viable again.
Get the checkbook out, Bates.
It's mad, isn't it? Like, it's just I was trying to work the maths out of how that actually kind of would come to pass, and that's why obviously Centrica kind of binned it in as a solution. I mean, look, depending on who you believe, we've got enough gas and oil in the North Sea to help us out. But this again, it's this. Sometimes I find the kind of the mixed messages you get about actually how easy it is to say that we have that kind of solution kind of in the North Sea, that it will instantly drive down kind of the cost of gas and electricity for UK businesses. But it just doesn't work that way. They flooded the market with additional barrels of oil to kind of mitigate kind of what's going on in Iran. What happened? All that extra oil just got sold at the spot price because that's what people are going to pay for it. You can't. The markets. We've got a free market, right? And actually, it's a strange thing to say potentially, but the best example of it working properly was actually the energy crisis. It really worked because we had massive shortage of supply. Market absolutely went out of anyone's kind of wildest nightmares, really, in terms of the price point. But it also came off incredibly abruptly. It kind of came off almost as quickly as it went up. It actually collapsed back out into what is now the new normal. And I know you and I love using the same kind of two graphs, the pre-21 graphs that have got that lovely £100 and something a megawatt hour spike in 2008. And then you do on the same scale, it pops out the kind of post-22, and basically you lose the line where 2008 was. And again, if you look at the price point, that was £100 a megawatt hour. And actually right now, I think power's trading today, I think at £99 a megawatt hour in the UK. And gas is, whatever it is in 117, the halcyon days, as say, of kind of £100 or 100 pence, you'd give kind of, quite a lot for that stability right now.
Absolutely.
And I think, but I think actually what's I do think it's really interesting that how the market is playing. And I think if you look at the underlying, as you're saying in Europe, actually our underlying fundamental position in the UK at the moment is really healthy, really healthy. We've got plenty of power, so plenty of supply, moderate demand, and actually this price point should be coming down quite quickly.
With one caveat.
With one massive, boating caveat. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, really. What that actually fundamentally this entire thing is being driven by. My view really is that this is political rhetoric, right? This political rhetoric is really what is pushing kind of the market up and down at the moment. Market's up this morning on comments kind of out of the US. Response from Iran will come. Stalled kind of peace talks. It's just driving kind of price kind of up, or pushing price up and then allowing it to fall kind of in equal measures. It's really challenging.
I'd like your take on something, right? Because I think I really think I'm thinking about customers, businesses all across Europe, and I really don't believe it's a time to panic right now. I think it's a time to trust the strategy, stay calm, trust what you set for your business. Maybe adjust it a little bit. I think now is a good time to review it, to review your short, medium, and long-term strategy if you're a business. Yep. Do you agree now?
Yeah, I think what any strategy you got should be under review, right? I don't think it's constantly. I don't think it needs constant change, but it should be constantly kind of under review. I think don't panic should remain the same. I mean, I penned an article for hospitality newsletter recently, and I actually kind of wrote these three points fundamentally, which is one, be prepared, two, be prepared, don't panic, and don't use it. Actually, pretty simple advice. Hospitality, it was very important in that space, but I just think that advice holds full stop. So when it comes to your strategy, I think it's really key that you do hold your course. That actually, if your decision was we're not going to take positions, then you need to trust that kind of position. But again, if you're on a flexible contract, chip away at it. You don't have to take huge chunks of it. You don't necessarily have to buy all of the volume. The other thing to always watch, and the counter to that to some extent, which is actually what's a number that you can stomach. And I think this sometimes gets lost in the kind of debate about risk management strategy and how far out you hedge and the rest of it, is actually what does a number look like for the business? Mm-hmm. And it's really easy for you and I, and we've got caught up in these discussions kind of with clients over the years, where you're thinking and you're really you're pontificating over what the kind of market is going to do and the strategies to put in place. Actually, the question I kind of really like to try and ask the customer is like, look, if you're paying 26p or 28p, how long can you sustain that? Can you stay? Are you passing that on to the customer? And if they can pass it on to the customer, then actually they may say, yeah, do you know what? If I can have 27 or 28p for the next 6 months, I'll take that. Now, it might not be the best decision in the world in terms of a technical strategy, but if you can wear it and the upside risk is far more damaging for you, then you make that choice. And that for me is when your strategy is under review, because it's actually, the strategy might still be sound, but the circumstances of your business are the thing that should drive what you do next.
Critical. I 100% agree, because I often get asked, what is the, I talked earlier, there's no silver bullet to the technology. There's no silver bullet to strategy. People say, oh, what's the answer, right, to navigate the markets? Can we have a copy paste? What works? There's none, because there's a variable in every strategy, and that's the business itself.
Yeah.
And I've worked with all sorts of customers, those that want budget certainty, or they have to have budget certainty, right? You pay a premium for that. It's not too dissimilar to getting a mortgage on a house. If you want to know what you're going to spend for a number of years, there's an element to a premium there that you pay for that security.
Yeah.
Which, fine. And with flexible contracts, you can set a date, trade up to it, manage it, take opportunity in the market, and say, by this date, I need to know what my price is, right? And then there's those customers that can wear risk. They can say, do you know what? I want to be open to changes in the market. I want to be open to changes in my business. I want to have the ability to, go and invest in that on-site generation, solar or battery store, whatever it might be. And I don't want to just tie myself in knots for a number of years. So I'll have less budget certainty, but I will have control and flexibility. But that key point is no two conversations are ever the same, because no two businesses are ever the same.
Yeah.
And I think that is the big thing. I think businesses now that are understanding what's going on and taking stock of it and not panicking, but coming up with, do you know what, let's have a look at our plan. Let's have a look what it means in this model, in this accelerated cost, or if the market drops, what does that mean for our business and how do we want to approach it?
Yeah.
I think it's a really good time to do that, Dan.
Yeah.
So I would like to get your opinion on where the market's headed. What's happened? The Baker prediction.
Wow. Again, I can feel all my old friends and colleagues in trading and risk about to take a sharp intake of breath. So I'm not about to try and take on the role of risk and trading, but I think it's more kind of observations about what we're seeing at the moment. So we've talked a little bit during kind of our chat so far about markets in the short term, long term, how this reflects kind of against historic market conditions. But the phrase and the kind of what we're seeing a lot of commentary around at the moment is that this is a short term issue that we have in the Gulf at the moment. And what does that mean? What's short term? And at what point does when does short term become a long term kind of issue? And at what point does what we're seeing now kind of start creeping in? So, for just to timestamp this, we're doing this on the 30th of April. At the moment, peace talks are kind of stalled. There's a sense that the two parties are further away. There's some news today that potentially the US are looking at new military targets. Now, that could be posturing. And that also, again, the White House is suggesting that these blockades may well go longer than perhaps originally intended. And fun enough, the market has now moved up again. And so we're seeing a bit of upward pressure. Now, for me, what's challenging with that is at what point does this start moving into the October, so winter 26, summer 27, winter 27, and even further out, and what times does this start sort of creeping through into those markets? Now, currently, those markets are elevated slightly, but I mean, still, you could argue those prices, some of them are worth considering, actually, or at least reducing some exposure, taking some risk and some control back, I suppose, as we've talked about a few times. Right. But what I think is interesting at the moment, I think why the market isn't reacting too much in the longer term is that the thing that I've been watching, and we've been talking about this a lot internally, is the thing we're watching is Qatar. Now, originally it got struck by some missiles or some fragments, and that's taken a couple of the LNG trains out. But I think what's interesting at the moment is that some of those LNG trains that are still operational are being recommissioned with a view to being productive again. And I don't think the Qataris would be doing that if they didn't think at some point in the fairly short term, very short term, there's going to be somewhere for that LNG to go, a ship, and therefore it be able to sail through the strait. And I think that is probably the thing which is keeping those kind of medium and long term prices suppressed and giving people a degree of comfort. I was going to say confidence, but I think confidence might be a stretch. But I think there's definitely a degree of comfort that's giving people that may well be coming into the market soon and may arrive in time for us to, mitigate some of the winter kind of panic. I think I was looking at the storage data as well, and it's kind of something that's quite interesting as well. So if you look at the gas storage in Europe, I know you've been talking a little bit about how we might get off that kind of LNG kind of import issue.
Weaning ourselves off.
Weaning off, that was the phrase used, yeah. And I think the gas storage at the moment, it's a little bit lower than it would like to be, but actually if you look at where it is versus a number of the historic recent history, it's not that far away from where we'd expect it to be at this time of year. And there are some injections going in, albeit at a slight premium. So I think if this unwinds itself reasonably sort of quickly, I think that pressure could come out of the market. And I think this is where really good risk management kind of, and strategy development and evolution kind of kicks in, because actually if you can hold your nerve, I still think there are some good prices to be found in the coming months, with the huge caveat that could change quickly if fundamentally the circumstances go against that thought. And this is why it's incredibly challenging at the moment to be a risk and trading, because actually all the fundamentals are bearish. Everything at the moment suggests that price should be coming off, and we're not seeing that because fundamentally rhetoric is superseding kind of any fundamental position.
Yeah, but this is the new. I don't like the word new normal, and I use it far more frequently than I care.
You really do. Actually.
I do.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things. But the new normal is this geopolitical level we talked about a bit earlier.
Yeah,
right?
Agreed.
And it just fundamentally as its core, it's unpredictability. So traders, strategy setting, we're looking at fundamentals, as you mentioned. We're looking at everything seems to be good, right? Everything seems to be fundamentally calm, bearish, and the market should reset. If tomorrow, fingers crossed it would happen, but a deal's struck, Strait of Hormuz opens up, I think there'll be a little bit of a hangover there. Yeah. But I think things will, if things maintain the current trajectory beyond the geopolitics, it should reset.
I think the other actor for me that is not overtly involved as it stands at the moment, I think actually could have a really kind of quick and kind of quite I was going to say aggressive impact, but I don't think that's probably the right phrase. But I think China have got a part to play here quite soon, because they clearly need the oil out of the Gulf and the LNG as well. Kind of they're a big kind of importer of the product, and I think at some point they are going to have to step into this and probably create a way that there's a deal gets done, so that again that LNG begins to flow, and I think that's going to be quite an interesting dynamic. I mean, having said that though, they have the ability to turn back to coal, so we're seeing a terrifying increase in coal, the use of coal-fired power stations again, because that's the way they're gonna have to go, and actually it's within their kind of gift to do that, and I think that's a kind of interesting byproduct of what's going on at the moment. But that's not sustainable either.
No, it is. And talking about not being sustainable, you teed me up very nicely to what I was thinking then.
It's like we planned it.
Yeah, but is that I think when the pressure's on, it's really easy to forget about sustainability. It's really easy to park it and just get back to fundamentals. And you shouldn't do that. We talked. I loved your point about coal, and that is China's insurance policy. A bit like I think you said to me the other day, our North Sea is ours almost, right? But if you're on the path to doing what you think is the right thing, Germany, for example, has almost got rid of coal, right? It's even Europe as a whole, it's almost gone. I don't want to see any shift to going back to that. I want to see the commitment to sustainability stay there, because it's so beneficial it's not just about the green agenda. It's about control. It's about renewability. It's about everything that's fundamentally the right thing to do as well.
We talked about this a little bit earlier as well. I said the 3 things that I'd written in an article, and one of those was, use less. Well, for me, the use less and sustainability are one and the same, right? So actually, doing the right thing was often doing the right thing because there was a purpose to that, right? And I still think that should absolutely exist, right? We've got children, want to try and leave the planet in a condition that it might still be here in the way that we know it for a little bit longer yet. But actually, I think for a lot of companies now, being sustainable or delivering that kind of agenda is actually about making the business more efficient and effective. And I've said this for years, I've been on record a number of times talking about this, but actually, if you're making a decision around sustainability and it makes just good business sense, then why would you not do that? And it's a huge part of what we do. And we work in an industry, our business, we talk about energy and net zero. That's what we kind of are trying to support our clients to do. It's very difficult to actually sell those 2 things when people don't want to talk about net zero and energy. There's kind of 2 things that kind of, are sort of persona non grata, right? And we've got to try and make that sort of discussion kind of a positive one again. And that's what I would like to try and make sure we're doing. It doesn't have to be this way, right? Actually, good energy management, good sustainability or net zero practice will just help your business be more effective and profitable to some extent, and not to some extent, to many extents actually. And I think that's kind of where I really see kind of the role of energy and kind of sustainability in business at the moment.
And to put a cherry on top of that sundae, I think, and I say this a lot, but I mean it, is that these kind of crises that we are experiencing and talking about yet again are absolute proof in the pudding that to have that strategy, that long-term approach, to consider renewables, to consider, I always see it, this is a big shift actually recently, which I'm really pleased to see, is that for many years I always found that you've got the use less and the cost and control, okay, were almost 2 separate conversations. So you were there with clients would optimize buildings, and try and squeeze it so that energy consumption was as low as possible to get what they need to do done to the standard they want to do it, right? And then you had the contract, the risk management, the approach to the market, protecting your bills was separate to that level. I think it was for many years a separate conversation. And what's happening now is if you bring those together, you use as little energy as possible to do what you need to do. And what's remaining, you have control, manage your costs, manage the renewables as part of that higher strategy. And I'm enjoying seeing those 2 things come together.
Yeah, I think on top of that as well, not to forget some self-generation, right? So I think when we think about renewables, sometimes it's kind of almost like it's a grid-based problem, but actually the businesses that are making it work best, for me, are the ones that are looking at this in all ways. So it's actually, what's your import impact, but also looking at your self-generation. What opportunities have you got at a simple level of solar, right? I mean, it should just be why it's just not on every building that's built now. Kind of, still befuddles me. I just such a missed opportunity a few years ago in the Housing Act, but I think that might change soon domestically. But I think commercially speaking, kind of actually looking at all of the things that are available to you, kind of around sort of self-generation. And I think one of the things I like about the sustainability piece, and we're seeing a lot more of this, and I think there are various kind of peer-to-peer kind of suppliers that are making this, sort of facilitating this, but I really like the idea of sort of these kind of community kind of opportunities. So, you've got a business that could make use out of CHP, which I know is a kind of slightly contentious sort of source, but actually for a lot of businesses it still makes really great sense, CHP, but actually they don't necessarily have the need for all of the power, or potentially all of the steam or the heat, whatever it is, and actually finding a local kind of community solution for that, or even just the business next door. Years ago I was working with a feed manufacturer, and actually their neighbour made tissue paper. They put a massive CHP in because they needed the power. They didn't need the steam and the heat, and they sent that next door. And they both split the cost of the thing, so everybody gained. And I think those kind of those examples for me are brilliant kind of opportunities that I think more businesses perhaps need to try and think about, or even landlords, that potentially looking at how these things can work.
They have to. I absolutely love that point. And I think from a really high level, we're starting to see that. I mentioned a bit earlier about EU investment in Accelerate EU. And now what we're seeing is electricity highways and infrastructure that crosses borders. So at a grid level and nation by nation EU level, we're seeing that, which is really important. But also, it's a big talking point. Take data centers. I'll always love talking about.
Oh, here we go.
Yes.
You're not writing anything for those at the moment.
Maybe I am. I'm like that when you see chat shows and the person invited on has a book to sell or has something a show coming out, and they're like, They do chit chat and then they want to get it out there.
Looks the camera.
Yeah, so there it is. Yeah, so I've been writing a white paper that will be released imminently, which I'm really excited about, and it's looking at how we power data centers of the future in a sustainable way. And it talks a little bit about. I'm not going to give away all the cookies on this, but it talks about what the problem is and how it needs to be addressed moving forward. And to go to your point in particular, one of the things that I've talked about on panels before, and it's a part of my white paper, is how data centers in particular operate in conjunction with the local community. They produce an immense amount of heat. So can't that heat the local swimming pool or go into a grid network to heat the houses next to it rather than put those two at loggerheads?
Yeah, there was a brilliant small kind of operation down in, was it Cornwall, where they did that, a small data center, basically used the heat to power the pool next door. Or was it a particular technology? I can't remember, but yeah, I feel like those opportunities are absolutely out there at the moment. I think, I think it's always to be explored, I think, for me.
Well, this is what I go back to another point I made earlier, which is how excited I am. I don't like that an energy crisis has to be the impetus for change, but it often is through history. And what we're seeing now is a revolution in the way we think about sustainability and energy and so on and so forth. So, I never criticize any watermark in history is where we've developed up to that point. And things develop. Quite often what was green and the right thing to do becomes greenwashing or becomes not fit for now. I don't think that. It's all about progress for me. But things are changing at rapid pace. So now you look at the metrics that served us and the strategy that served us a decade ago, and this, 20 years, this is my 20th year in the industry. So if you go back half of that, everything has evolved dramatically. And now what we're looking at is how efficient are you really? How are you a carbon intensive built operation, or have you got stripped out that to be carbon neutral really? And part of that is looking at what's your community impact, what's your grid impact. You're seeing regularly in the news that businesses are being flexible to help the grid at stress points.
Yeah,
and I think that's a really good move to say, country by country, company by company. It's not just about what we do; it's about how we interact with those around us.
I think it's a really good point, isn't it? And yeah, I, like you, have been working in this industry longer than I sometimes realise, and you actually see it's almost like trends are coming back around again, or kind of undoing
back in fashion,
undoing policy. Seasonal time of day, stod contracts kind of like raise their head again, because actually they're now, everyone wanted a single unit rate for ages, and actually now with kind of various kind of self-generation EV charging, actually tariffs by time of day are actually kind of back in. Not just vogue, but they're a necessity, right? Because actually, and it allows the grid to kind of flex, as you rightly say. But equally, the old triads and load shifting that used to kind of go on during the peak periods, during the winter. Well, I heard sort of some suggestion that might be needed again, but policy was redesigned because it was so successful, everyone was doing it. They weren't generating the cash that they should have done.
Yep. And Granite paid more for energy.
Absolutely.
Right?
So they shifted it, and now everyone stopped doing it. Now they've got a problem again. So yeah, I think this kind of ebb and flow is always kind of a really interesting part of our industry. And as we know, it depends is kind of the favourite phrase of energy, isn't it? Something we talk about a lot. So I think in short, I think there's brilliant opportunity at the moment for businesses. I think there's some existential threats as well in terms of kind of the risk of energy kind of price movement, as we've talked about in this little segment. But I do think the businesses that will be most successful moving forward are the ones that will embrace this and turn it into competitive advantage. And if you can do that, then I think you've got a real kind of chance of kind of making energy work for you.
And that's a phenomenal point to end on. I've absolutely loved talking to you. We do this off camera regularly. Random Tuesday I'll get a phone call, but to do it on camera and have what a conversation we'd normally have has been really enjoyable. I hope everyone watching has enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. And look, really hope we get to do more of these.
Absolutely.